We're going to do some Pro Tools 110 exam review. These could be potential things you should know or study for this difficult exam. Yeah, you definitely need to study a lot for the 101 and especially the 110. The 110 is a little bit harder in my opinion. So let's just go over some questions that you might receive or things that you should know. So you should know that if you can import various things, I can import audio files like WAV files or AIF files. I can import MIDI files in and of themselves. If you didn't know about MIDI files, they're great. They're very small. They're very useful. I can go between DAWs. I can export from Logic into Pro Tools. I can export from Pro Tools and into any other DAW like Logic, for example. And I can import video files. That's a little bit more problematic these days with QuickTime issues. QuickTime is kind of old, but I think they're revising that. But yeah, you can get video files into Pro Tools. Pro Tools is the default editor for films and visual media. So yeah, all these three things: audio, MIDI, and video. So you should know about that. Let's see what else here. So all of those things you should know are able to import into Pro Tools. So let's talk about clip groups real quick. I'm just kind of bouncing around here. So you can have a group of clips. So I have a bunch of MIDI clips here, and let's say I just want this whole chunk to be a group. That's usually under the clip menu. We do Option, Command G, or Alt Control G if you're on a PC. So I do that. I can group that. Now it's just one big block of MIDI data, and I can ungroup Option, Command, group that way. So the idea is here that you can group and ungroup and even regroup the clips. You can see all the ungroup, group, and regroup. The regroup is kind of complicated. There's some nuance there, but basically like if you edit one of these groups, let me ungroup this. If I edit one of these groups in here and I have a repeat of that, so for example, if I group this and oops, not that type of group, that's a regular group. So if I group that like that, zoom out, and I option drag this over here, and let's say I ungroup this, and I go in here and I don't know, I just like delete one of these things, or well yeah, let's delete one of these things, doesn't really matter. This is just an example, I'm not going to ruin anything. And let's say I regroup that, Option Shift R, it'll kind of give me a little notification. Do I want to modify the clip over here? And let's say I modify it. Now you can see how it took off the clip over there. So you can ungroup and regroup things, and maybe you have a repeat of something that's like a verse or a chorus or something like that, and it'll ask if you want to modify that. I'm going to step back to Z because I want to keep it where it was. So yeah, that's about clip groups. You should know about clip groups. And you can have multiple groups. So for example, I could have groups within groups, or clip groups within clip groups. So, and you can have a clip group, believe it or not, of just one clip. So I'm not exactly sure why that's useful, but maybe you can think of something, some scenarios. But here's a clip, and I can just Option Shift group it, and now that became a little clip right there. And let me see if I can zoom in on that because it's hard to see. You can see that little icon there. And let me ungroup it. Now it went back to a regular clip. I'm going to group it again. You can see that little fader there. And along the same lines, you can see these icons change. Woo, where are we? We can see these icons change over here. Sorry, I'm having monitor issues. But basically, in the clip list over here, you can see the clips change. You can have, MIDI groups, clip groups, like audio clip groups. You can mix them up. You can do clip groups across tracks. Like if I had this aux click track in between things or buses and stuff, I can group across those things. I can group that. And it should give me a little broken thing, but I guess that works. So that grouped, I can ungroup that. So that's about all you need to know for clip groups. Just know what they are. And the real tricky question might be, you need more than one clip in a clip group. Actually, you don't. I think you can have a clip group with just one. So let's talk about pre-roll and post-roll real quick here. This is a often useful thing you can do. So I have this song here, and let's say I want to start overdubbing right here. Right at that point. Where's my click here? It's right over here. Well, oftentimes you don't want to start overdubbing right on the beat, right? So on the transport and up here on the floating transport that's embedded in the edit window, we can put pre-roll in there, and I can have it 2 measures, for example. I have to hit enter, and that turns it on and off. And there's also post-roll, which will play after. So let's just stare at this up here and look at this, because it's very subtle what goes on here. Why is that's really annoying. Hold on, let me get this. There, maybe my window. Come on, don't zoom multiple. I have multiple monitors here and it's acting kind of funny. I'm really just trying to zoom in on this part right here, but it's kind of moving stuff around. But you can see these little flags right there. They designate the pre-roll time. And see how they highlight yellow when I click on the pre-roll and the post-roll? That means it's engaged. But it kind of shows you where that is. So that's pre and post-roll. And there is a real tricky command. Let me see if I can do it here. It's so tricky, I forgot how to do it. But basically, if we had a selection up here, I should be able to move the selection here across. Let me try it over here. Let me just make a selection here. And so one question might be, how do we move this selection around with the grabber? So I believe, whoops. Let's try that again. So here's our selection. And the question might be, how do you move around the selection point? Oh, no, I know what I was getting at. So if I have this selection here, I can move the selection around like that. That's what I was trying to do. Right? I can click on the timeline playback window. And then there should be a modifier key to move that around. That's what I wanted. Okay, there we go. So it's options. So I can have a selection in the edit window, and you can move it around by Alt or Option clicking on the timeline portion of that. This is an edit selection here. This is a timeline selection, and the option will move that selection around. You might get something like that. So that it's a modifier key, because if I don't use the modifier key, the option key, then it will move the start and end point, or the head or tail of that. So option, hold that down, and you can see how that works. All right, you should know about different record modes. Quick punch mode is my favorite record mode. Usually there's just normal mode, but there's also loop record. If you want to just loop around something and record on each pass, you can do that. That works great. I never really use destructive record because of hard disk space. Quick punch is really useful. Real quickly, let me demonstrate that. If I want to record on my kick drum here, let me record enable that, and I hit playback, and you see it's playing here, even though I'm just recording nothing right now. I guess I could record my voice here too, but and I finally hit record, even though my input isn't hooked up because this preamp isn't hooked up right now. So that was punch record. I punched in after it was playing back, but the beauty of it is I can pull it back. I can trim it back. So it's basically always recording before you even record. So that's quick punch. And you should know that these can be accessed through the option menu, as well as right-clicking on the record button itself. And that's my favorite mode. I'm usually in quick punch almost all the time. So you should know about that mode. So you should know that all these record options are under the option menu. And this is a great time to repeat. If there's a question on the exam, is it something that's just a window? Is it an option? Or is it a view? Are you just viewing something? Or is it an option like you're turning some feature on and off? Like, for example, loop recording or punch recording is an option. It's not really a view that you're looking at. The view might be like something in the mix window that you're making appear or disappear, or the edit window, things like that. So let's talk about timescales, ticks, and samples. And I hope my zoom is working here well. Well, it's okay, but let's see here. Let me just zoom out a little bit. Maybe that's just a little bit extreme. Okay, so I've got some audio tracks here, and they default to samples. So audio tracks are by default samples, and MIDI tracks. Let me find some MIDI tracks here. I know I have some MIDI tracks. Zoom out a little bit. It's hard to see here, but these are in ticks. So an instrument track or a MIDI track are in ticks, which means that by the information, the MIDI information, will natively respond to tempo changes. So that's when something's tick-based. Audio tracks, when they're in samples, they'll sort of ignore this sample value here again. They will ignore, let me see if I have my fancy little zoom thing here. Is that option Q? Yeah, right here. So that's samples or ticks. Here's ticks, right? Ticks. So that is a time value of how the information behaves. So audio tracks are in samples, MIDI tracks, instrument tracks are in ticks. So a default timescale that of ticks would be bars and beats because it responds to like tempo information. And as you know, ticks are an inherent property of the MIDI protocol, and there's 960 ticks per quarter note. There's 960 ticks per quarter note. Also, if you start to have a quarter note, an eighth note, what's half of 960? Well, it would be 480. Okay, what's half of 480? Or what's half of an eighth note? It would be a 16th note. Half of 480 would be 240, would be the tick value, a numeric value of that MIDI note. So you can do some fancy stuff with tick-based with audio as well. If you put it in tick-based and it's elastic audio, then you can start to change the tempo of this entire piece. We'll get to elastic audio here in a bit, but you can do some fancy stuff sort of like by morphing the tempo by, having it in ticks and elastic audio. That's kind of cool. What else should we know here? That, so you know about ticks and you know about samples. And so we know that audio tracks default to what type of time? Samples, right? Yes. So another question you may receive would be about if you kind of increase the tempo and what would happen to the MIDI track. So let's just try it. So here's my MIDI track here, and these are tick-based, so all this is going to respond. And let me just go extreme here. So if I have this MIDI clip here, let me zoom in a little bit. If I have this MIDI clip here and I increase the tempo, what's going to happen to it? Well, it's going to get a lot faster. Let me go to like 300. So my selection now, that's my before. It was just this one file. And let me redo it. And now all that became a lot shorter because I made the tempo a lot faster. So I'll undo that. So basically, you have to kind of think what would happen to the MIDI information. If you increase the tempo, it's going to kind of contract. If you make the tempo slower, decrease the tempo, it's going to expand. And this is kind of like a time-space continuum. As the tempo gets faster, the space gets shorter. As the tempo gets slower, the space expands because there's like a continuous playback rate. And so that's kind of how these things will morph. And so you should just kind of know what's going to happen. So as I did that, let me do that again. So see how all these things slid over because I made my tempo a lot faster. Let me undo it, and kind of it expands back out. Hopefully that makes sense. But you should kind of know how things adjust as you change, how MIDI clips will change as you change the tempo. Cool. So if we increase the tempo, though, to a sample-based track or a sample-based clip, then nothing really happens, right? That means that if I change the tempo, this isn't modifying it at all, right? If you had a bunch of like separate clips, then the start points would conform to the tempo change. That means like if I had a bunch of like drum hits, for example, on a grid, and I put my audio track into ticks, then the tempo would kind of they would move. If you had it in elastic audio, then the whole thing would change. So I guess I could demo that now if I just put everything in Elastic Audio and change the tempo, but it's kind of time consuming, so I'm just going to keep on moving on here. So modifying the tempo of sample-based materials will kind of not really do anything. So let's try this again. Let me just be extreme about it. I'm just going to mark in the tempo here, and I'm going to go to 300. And look at how all these MIDI clips are going to contract. Make sense? Cool. I'm going to undo it. But look how none of the audio changed, right? Now let me put the track into samples, the MIDI track into samples, which is kind of weird. And I'm going to change the tempo again. Let's go to 300 here. And it shouldn't respond at all. Okay? So the MIDI track, if it's in, or sorry, instrument track, if it's in samples, it will just kind of ignore the tempo changes. Hopefully that makes sense. And you know, the audio here is just chilling out. It's in samples, and it kind of just ignores any type of tempo information change, right? So this is kind of an interesting one. This is a strange question. I have these MIDI tracks here, some keyboard stuff, right? And let's highlight that. And if you want to play this, like any audio track too, if I just click and hold down, I'll eventually get to the audio to play. So let's do this again. So if I wanted to play this little clip here, I can option click and hold down. And maybe there's a little bit of pre-roll there, but also maybe my default, let me take that off solo. Maybe it has something to do with solo. I think I know why it's not working. This is actually good that it's not working because I can show you how to fix it. So setup, I believe it's in IO. There is a preview path. So you have these audition paths. I think they're good, but there's also a default instrument that you set. So here's a bunch of monitor paths that can be useful for soloing and monitoring stuff. This is my IO setup, as you know. But I guessed wrong. I think it's somewhere else. And sorry, Pro Tools is highly complicated. So I think it's in the preferences. And I should be under MIDI. And there should be a, if I remember correctly, there's some like default through instrument. Oh, yes, there it is. So Pro Tools preferences, default through instrument, it wasn't defined. So I'm going to try the instrument that's kind of in here. You could choose like kind of a basic piano is sometimes good. So let's see. I just put something into the contact player. Put contact player in there, and let's see if that works now. I clicked OK. There we go. So now I'm clicking and holding, and let's do it again. Holding on Option here or Alt if you're on a PC. Right? And this guitar track should have played. There we go. There we go. So hopefully you're hearing that come through. But it works for audio too. But I had to set my default playback device. Preferences, MIDI, default playback device. Let me show it to you one more time. Preferences, MIDI. Where is it? Right here. Default through instrument. Right? So I had to define that. That was undefined, so I didn't hear any sound. And I actually like when I mess up, because then I have to like find the pathway and slow it down a little bit, which is always good. So let's see here. So how many different ways can we select MIDI? So can we, let's open up the Midi Viewer, which is, I think it's Control equal or Windows key equal. So one way to do it is to select each note with the grabber, right? I can kind of just do that. And maybe Shift select, for example. Or, yeah, the command doesn't do it so well, but I'll just Shift select. But I can select lots of things this way, right? That's one way to do it. I could, I like the Smart Tool a lot. This Smart Tool is on right now, that little bar above there. And so, let me use my fancy mouse thing. There we go. Is that working? No, it's Option Q. There we go. Right here. So I like that Smart Tool to be on. And then I can have this crosshair and just select multiple tracks, select multiple MIDI notes that way, right? So I can select with the grabber and holding down Shift. I can, with the Smart Tool, click and drag. That works great. I can also, this is not in the test, but you can kind of select, if I wanted to select all of these bass notes, right? I can do that across this MIDI clip. So I can shift click each note again. I can click and drag a rectangle around the notes. Yep, that works too. And I can even use the selector tool. This is something I can just drag across a whole range if I just want, like, I don't know, this measure right here, right, of these notes. I can do that too. So all those work great. Another question, I think this is more 101, but it's actually good to repeat, is where MIDI notes are. So I have MIDI data or MIDI information here in the MIDI editor. There's also the score editor. Where are you, score editor? Where are you hiding from me? Right there. So you could have notes. It's on a different screen here, but I can have notes here appear. And that is technically MIDI data. And I think that it's acting funny here, but because I have stuff selected. Let me undo that. So I've got score editor, I have MIDI editor, and then you actually have clips. This is actually MIDI data. I can like copy it, I can transpose it, I can move it around. Let's delete that tempo there so it aligns here. So this is MIDI data too. There's also a notes view that, this brings me way back when there wasn't even a MIDI editor. You can actually zoom in here. Excuse me. You can zoom in here and see the MIDI notes themselves. Right? You can see that. So clips view, notes view, that's all MIDI data. So any of those are fair game for MIDI stuff. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Elastic Audio. I know I mentioned that previously. So, Elastic Audio, let me just define it first. Elastic Audio is mainly used to move around audio transients. So, for example, these kick notes here, let me make this all uniform size here. Option hold is like is a modifier there. So these kick notes here, this is an audio file, right? And I do have a click on this session, that's why I chose it. And I can move around these transients with Elastic Audio. So you can do fancy stuff like quantize and transpose stuff. So Elastic Audio, we turn it on right over here. And this since it's a kick drum, this is going to be rhythmic. So it has to crunch the process, and then eventually, once you do that, warp view will become activated. Whereas this track doesn't have Elastic Audio on. You can see right here, there's no Elastic Audio, whereas this one does have rhythmic turned on. And this other track, you can see they're grayed out because it's not turned on. So this one's turned on, it's green right here. It means that the rhythmic stuff is turned on. And that means that I can start to quantize this. I can start to move the notes around in the same way. So let's say I have this right here. And I think that, that's mostly in time. But let's say I just wanted to move a transient around. I would go into warp view, and then I would zoom in here, and I could move around this. It's very important that you pin the audio down. So let's say I don't want to move these kicks around a little bit. I double click and turn that into a warp marker. It pins the audio down. And then I can move this one. Whoops. I can move that one around freely. I'm in grid mode right now and like with one bar. So it's a little bit strange. But let's just go into slip mode. And let's say I want to move this one around wherever freely. I can do that. I don't know if I was trying to be on the downbeat there. And I can just undo that. But you have to pin the audio down. Otherwise, if you just start to move stuff, you'll lose sync. So you want to be very careful of that with, something like this, which is a continuous kick track recording. All right, so more about Elastic Audio here. You can use Elastic Audio to transpose things. I was trying to do the kick drum. I was having trouble before, but I went to my guitar track here. I turned on Elastic Audio. I right-click on the track, go to the Elastic Properties window, which I believe is the same window as this window right here. If you want to get there this way, my fancy zoom thing there. Okay, so with this then, I can just kind of soloing that, and I can just kind of transpose it up. So know that I believe you might be asked how many semitones you can transpose, and it's 24 in each direction, which means it's 2 octaves. Put that back to 0. Yeah, so that's the Elastic Properties window, which might come in handy there. Great. So one question you should know about the Smart tool. This is more 110 material. So we got the trimmer here. Let's just review a little bit. I have the trimmer, selector, grabber. We know what they do. There's also the TCE trimmer. If I click and hold there, that would be time compression expansion trimmer. Scrub trimmer, which will play back the audio as you're moving it, and the loop trimmer if you're trimming like a loop, it'll kind of continue it or make it longer. But I just use the standard one in this case. Selector, we know what that does. We know what the grabber does. And if we click on this bar here, then we're using the Smart tool. And what does that mean? So let's bring up my guitar track here, and I'm going to do E, which is zoom toggle. You should know that. See that right up here? Zoom toggle. Right up there. It's just doing that command. So it's like basically zooming up whatever's selected. If I hit E, it just zooms in. I'm in keyboard focus mode right here. So, and I'm just doing this to demo the Smart tool. So if it's in the center bottom half of the clip, it is the grabber, and I can move things around. If it is the center top of it, then it's the selector, and I can select things. If it goes to the edge, it is the trimmer tool, right? And if I go to the top corners, it becomes like a fade in, right? Again, middle center grabber selects the whole clip. It's funny, the grabber is actually more like a selector because it moves stuff around and selects the whole clip in a fast way. Up here, it's the selector, trimmer, and a fade and a fade. There's also crossfades. If I have overlapping clip data, for example, if I have something like this, I can see it's obviously overlapping. Oops, I didn't hold on the option there. Option, like that. There's overlapping clip data, and if I go to the bottom, then I can do a crossfade like that, right? But you have to be careful that it doesn't go beyond the bounds. So if I just do a short little crossfade, that should work. Oh, interesting. So it seems like maybe let me get some more overlapping here. Let's do that. There we go. Now there should be plenty of overlapping, and it won't give me that error message. Let's step back because I don't want to ruin the song here. Actually, even though I always save as. Yeah, so know what the Smart tool does there? That's definitely 110. They might ask you where the mouse location is and how it changes. This is really good to know. It's super useful. Okay, so the real-time property windows, I think I have it viewed here. And so all these views right here can be controlled from this little drop-down menu. There's the real-time properties. And it applies to MIDI. And so think of it like, it's like almost like a MIDI plugin. So I've got this MIDI track here. Just a little piano-style bass line. And the real-time properties can be viewed from this drop-down menu right there, real-time properties. Just like I can hide and show various aspects of the edit window, this little pop-up view window. And in this window here, real-time properties are like MIDI plugins. So you might have questions about this, what it applies to. So it'll apply to MIDI tracks and instrument tracks, but not so much audio tracks. So let me just demo this real quick. So let's say I wanted to quantize something. And let's say I'm going to quantize now to 16th note or 8th note. So it totally changes the feel. Let's go to 16th note. Might be a little bit better. Or if I wanted to turn it off together. Let's quantize to 8th note triplets. That's pretty close, but if I just did 16th notes. But you get my drift here. You can, let's try some delay. I actually haven't done a little bit of delay, but let's try this. Let's try to, I can kind of push things forward or back. I can play with the duration. make things quieter, and then I can just take that off. Let's try a little bit of delay here. I haven't really tried this that much, but I think this is kind of just if you want to align the timing of something, you can do that. Velocity, let's say I wanted to transpose. I think it's out of the range of my instrument. So I'm just going to go back to an octave here. Let's go to 0. And let's go semitones here. So it's just like a real-time MIDI based plugin. So we know with MIDI sequencer data, that's going to be an instrument track and a MIDI track, right? So that's the real-time properties, and you can come up with some very useful things there if you just wanted to quantize something, but you don't want to commit to the audio clip. You can use this plugin. Very nice. Plugins are good like that. So we can. I'm just kind of scrolling through different topics here. Let's see here. So we can add an event ruler. So let's say I want to add in a marker here to the timeline. So in order to do that, I'm going to hold down Control, and I think I can just start adding markers like that, and it'll bring up that window, right? Let's try it again. So I can just Control click. I'm going to Mac right now. That would be Windows. But let's say I wanted to add a tempo change. I can click on that, and I can add a tempo change, or a meter change, a tempo change, right? So I'm going to step back because I don't want to mess my MIDI sync. But I can add markers, meter, or changes by the option. In the same way, Control. all over the space here. So Control will add, Option will remove it. Oftentimes, though, I can just drag off that, but not always. So Option, I got to click on that. So Option will remove, Control will add. Markers I can drag off, and markers are a little bit more varied. All right. So another question you may get. So how can we make a selection during playback? So let's say I play this here. I'm going to mark in here. Now let's go to slip mode. I can down arrow to make a selection. Let's try to get this one right here. Down arrow. Up arrow. Down arrow. Up arrow. So down arrow and up arrow is a really convenient way to make a selection on the fly. So down arrow, up arrow, it's a great way to get a general selection. Then I would go back in after I have a selection like that, and then I can hold down Shift to adjust the bounds of my selection, like so forth. I'm in slip mode there, but I'm doing MIDI. That's okay. So again, a little bit about pre and post roll. So how can you change pre and post roll values? So we can do it in a lot of different ways. We talked about pre-roll. Let me bring up the transport command 1. There's the pre-roll. I could just program the pre-roll in there. Let's say I want 2 bars. I could just type it in 2 bars. There we go. Or let's say I want the post-roll to be 1 bar. That's just after it plays back. I'm going to change the pre-roll again to 1 bar. So yeah, so you can type it in this little dialog there. Let's see if I can also drag the pre-roll marker. Yeah, I can change that. That's great. And let me do it in a more meaningful musical value. So let's put back into grid mode. And let's give me quarter notes. And let's look at that again. Zoom in here. And I can just drag this, and it'll snap to more meaningful musical values. So say I was going to overdub that section there. I can just drag it right there. It's Option or Alt, so it does, see how it does both of them, the front and the back? That's a nice modifier. Is about the video playback engine. So this is in the playback engine, the video engine. And it's kind of strange. It's a strange feature. Go to the playback engine. This is a very important screen. I go here whenever there's a monitoring problem, and I just make sure the audio hardware is correct. The buffer size is very important. In the previous video, I was having trouble with playback. It started to glitch a little bit. I upped the buffer size, and that worked. I think it was 256. And that is the amount of time you give Pro Tools to crunch numbers, to like run plugins and stuff, and it's a time duration. It's like a processing buffer, but what it affects is recording latency. So you might hear a little bit of audible delay if this is really high. But here's the video engine right here. There is the video engine. And it's strange that there's even a button. It's like, why don't they just enable it with the video? Well, that could be good, but sometimes when we do that, that allows us to have video. And so the reason you don't always want it on, maybe this is why it's manual, is because it eats up about a gig of RAM, which is kind of a lot. So if you're not even using the video, you don't want it on. So you might have more processing power to run plugins. And even in this small session here, I'm having trouble keeping up with it. And this is an older MacBook Pro, so I kind of need to be on top of that. So processing power isn't infinite. So good, my video engine is off. I'm not using video in this session. So another question you might get is, we went over importing audio. Let's see here. Let's review this one again. This one's good again. And it's good if I review multiple ones in here. So let's say I have a selection here. And if I want to move this around, the selection around, how do I move that around from the timeline up here? So I can move the start and end point like that. That's kind of cool to do. But I believe that it's option. Yeah, options like the magic key command will move that selection around. So that's a good review. And sorry if I'm reviewing a few questions here, but you can always use a few review questions. So loop record, where is that again? From the option menu, because it's an option you turn on and off. It's not necessarily a window, and it's not really a view. You don't want to loop at it. It's just something you want to do. Let's see here. What else can we know about ticks and samples. We know about audio tracks are sample based. Midi tracks are tick based. So elastic audio can be really tricky. I think we talked about this. Let's talk about let's go a little bit more into elastic audio here. I'm going to turn on the elastic audio. I've got some drum overheads here, and I'm going to turn it on here, right here. And again, if I don't turn it on, I have the analysis in warp view, but they're grayed out because it's not turned on yet. So let's turn that on. And this is a percussive track. It's drum overhead, so it's going to be rhythmic. I turn that on. Now, in real time, I can kind of do cool stuff, and it'll kind of adjust to the tempo. So one way to get good results from elastic audio, you could render the sounds. So this can be enabled with elastic audio right here. If I expand this, let's say I go to rendered processing and I go in here and I start to change stuff. Let's say I just make one little change. I'm going to shift select right there. And if I move that around, it's going to render stuff. So what it did there, I believe that it made another copy. See how my clip list did something there? So this is cool because it's not using, see how the light is off there? So if you want to just do one little fix on one little file and you don't want to take up CPU power, this might be good. So, but it's creating an audio file every time, I believe, here. So you got to be careful of that because it can take up a lot of disk space. So I'm going to put that back to real-time processing. So know about rendered processing. So these are event markers. So they're basically just transient detection things, and I can like double-click. Go back to slip mode. I can double-click and add them, or just single-click. I believe it's with the grabber, though. Let's try with the grabber. There we go. Thank you. So I can move those around. I rarely go in here in case it's like, unless it's like to clean something up. So I can kind of add other ones in here, and I can move them around. It's really just transient detection. I don't go in here that much, but that is analysis view, and these are event markers. In warp view, you can see these are warp markers. They have the little triangle right here. Let's just zoom in there. These are warp markers, and the point of them is so that, let me get out of grid mode here. Oh, I am in slip mode. Okay, that's great. zoom in here. So the point of these is to pin the audio down. So you got to be careful because like if I move these around like that, it'll move the information or the transient information around a little bit. And let's say you mess something up, we could always just revert back and let's turn elastic audio off. Let's say none. It'll ask us, and I want to revert. I want to go back to the original timing. The elastic audio pitch transposition. Let me see if I can just transpose the pitch here. Let's turn this back on. And let's go to polyphonic this time. And let's right click on this, go to elastic properties. And there we go. And so let's solo this. Let's mark in here. That's why I like the smart tool a lot. Let's mark in. Right? And let's say I want to transpose this. Let's make it higher pitched. Let's go up like an octave. So I hear some artifacting there, but let's say I want to go lower pitched. See what that sounds like. I think I have my pre-roll on here too. Let's turn that off. Yeah, so I can pitch shift, but I have to select the whole clip. It has to be separated. I can't do that elastic properties with the selection like this. It has to be separated, then that window will pop up. So that's really important. That is a question they might ask you, which is you have to have a separate audio clip to do these elastic properties window, which is basically for pitch transposition. So we know the analysis view. Just to review again, I'm just kind of going all over the place. Analysis view gives us the event markers, and I can just double click here to add another one, and I can move that around. And it's not warping anything. These aren't warp markers. So analysis view has event markers, which are just transient lines that I have to go over here to warp markers to start to do stuff. And you can see the little that I've done something with elastic audio here. That little elastic audio icon will appear, and you can see also over here in the clip list that those have elastic audio processing on them. We talked about ticks again. There's 960 ticks per quarter note, 480 ticks per eighth note, 240 ticks per 16th note. So let's see here. How many sends can you have in Pro Tools? How many can be displayed? That's a question you might see. How many sends and inserts? That's good to know. So I usually do these over here, but in the same way that we were playing with views here, I can have 10 inserts, 10 sends, but oftentimes that's a lot unless I'm doing mastering or something. And this little pop-up window is down here. It's like the mixed window pop-up window. I can see identical stuff over here. View, mixed window views. It's almost an identical menu to this menu pop-up right here. So yeah, there's 10 inserts, there's 10 sends. You might have a question like that. So let's see here. You might have a question about elastic audio pitch transmission. Can we remove elastic audio? Sure, we can remove it without degrading the quality. So we can kind of remove stuff if we mess up. We can pedal back. So it's usually in real time, unless you're doing rendered only processing. So we can have we can loop things. Let's see. Let's do some loops here. Let's go back over here, and I'm just gonna loop a clip here. Let me just grab this guitar clip, I don't know, and zoom in here. So I can loop this. Let's say I loop it 8 times, right? So you can loop clips. I should be able to loop MIDI like that, but look how it's like kind of one big chunk now of 8 loops, right?